All right, here's your video notes for Valentine's Day for your European history.
Woo! Are we going to talk about Valentine's in Europe?
We just had it on this day in history.
We don't watch that. I don't want to hear about it.
He died like in 200s. It's not our time period. Valentine, he died in 200s. Test again is probably going to be Wednesday next week. Oh, belt on your check. Don't forget Monday's belt on your check too.
Oh, how many do we have?
I think y'all have one less than everybody else. I think it's 27. Yeah, 27. 27 today or 27 Monday?
I have 27 today.
So then 28 on Monday. 28 on Monday. Alright. So we got to this. We got through the last little bit. We talked about how quality of life is improving with new technologies. The Industrial Revolutions helped to improve all that. We talked about refrigerated rail cars, ice boxes, all that yesterday. Moving on to our next topic. Alright, it's a little bit out of left field, but they want us to briefly mention some of the non-governmental reforms this time period. We're going to talk about some more reforms this time period in the next unit too. It's kind of a hodgepodge collection here because we had like women's rights in this unit, and we're going to have this, but you're going to get some other political reforms in the next unit. So it's all the same time period, but just kind of different aspects. But anyway, there are people who are outside the government who do reform as well. A lot of these are philanthropists who do philanthropies, which is charity, basically. So in addition to government changes, or in addition to government reform, there are philanthropists out there who are trying to do different types of charity work for poverty or people who are have inequality against them. Many of these reformers are, of course, inspired by religious faith. So many of these reformers are inspired by their religious faith. One thing you might remember from U.S. history is the social gospel movement. The social gospel movement hits like 1870s, 80s, and 90s. The social gospel movement focused on improving social conditions over individual salvation. It's like you take Jesus' message and you worry more about your fellow man and their conditions than probably your own salvation. So the idea is that you focus more on improving social conditions over individual salvation. They believe that feeding the hungry, improving housing for the poor, and organizing labor unions would enable people to become more devout Christians. So they believe that feeding the hungry, improving housing for the poor, and organizing labor unions were better chances of making people Christians. Because you see the good works, good charity of people and what they do, it help people out, so on and so forth. Also, like Salvation Army. Like Salvation Army comes out this time period. Salvation Army is made by Britain around the 1860s or 70s. That's another example of charity that we adopt. So things like Salvation Army, social gospel movement, there's a lot of religious influence here because Salvation Army is the same thing. It's called Salvation Army because there's a religious slant to their charity giving as well. All right. One of the things that's kind of old, but they want us to bring up is the British abolitionist movement. We talked about this a while back, but kind of bring this up one more time. The British abolitionist movement was big in the late early 1800s. So the British abolitionist movement was big in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Their main goal, though, was to abolish the slave trade. So the British abolitionist movement's main goal was to abolish the international slave trade. They didn't all universally agree or push for ending slavery at first. So a lot of their push was more on finishing the Atlantic slave trade. All these movements had mainly women involved in them. So all these movements, like the abolitionist movement, temperance, all that, mostly women who led these movements. Right, kind of crazy. Women were heavily involved in trying to highlight the immorality of human bondage and cruel treatment of the slaves, especially female slaves. So women were trying to highlight the immorality of human bondage and cruel treatment of slaves, especially the female slaves. We get it. We get it. Their pressure does eventually lead to England abolishing the slave trade by 1833. So 1833, you see the slave trade abolished. You also somewhat watched a movie on this a while back about England trying to abolish the slave trade. I think it finally died. I tried it the other day. It wouldn't work for me either. So Sorry.
Aiden has a pencil sharpener in the homework in here.
Oh wait, hold on. I got you.
I have a pencil.
Go see Ethan. Anyway, so yeah, so that was the reform movement. But again, it's people who are what? Right, regular like people, middle class types. It's just normal people, not. Yeah. Josephine Butler, we've already talked about. Josephine Butler was a middle class woman who began her work in the 1860s on behalf of women and girls who were forced into prostitution. So Josephine Butler was someone who pushed for reform. She's a middle class woman who began her work in the 1860s on behalf of women and girls who were forced into prostitution. As we talked about, she helped to raise the age of consent and helped to end a lot of sex trafficking type stuff. She also helped to establish an industrial school or schools to give females vocational skills to help them have a better potential earnings in life, essentially. So she helps to also establish some vocational schools to give women some basic skills so they can go get a job and get paid better than they would as,
But why just not burn this?
Exactly. Just get them off the streets, right? Exactly. They also campaign against. She also campaigned against human trafficking, as we mentioned. So she also tries to stop a lot of sex slave trafficking that was happening in Europe. What? You get what I'm saying? You get it. All right.
We dog him so much. I'm so sorry.
Temperance movement. Temperance movement. The temperance movement. So this is very similar to America back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Very similar situation. Women mainly led an organized attempt to ban the sale and consumption of alcoholic beverages. So women led an organized attempt to ban the sale and consumption of alcoholic beverages in this time period.
They were also just tired of getting beat every night.
Right. Or their husbands wasting money on the booze and stuff.
Okay, that's understandable.
Right. So, unlike America, though, they never achieved prohibition. So, unlike the United States, they never achieved prohibition. But this was mainly a movement led by women. Ministers of churches could have as well, too. But mainly women led this movement.
Was it also led by middle class, or was it the lower classes because they...
Mostly middle classes. Remember, lower classes, they like to drink more.
They're the ones whose husbands would be drinking.
Right. But isn't necessarily... Well, I guess there's some level of them involved, too. But remember that all the big morality pushers, all the big reformers are going to come out of that middle class. Plus, they had the time to, right?
So were they doing it for their own experience, or because he experienced that the other classes were?
More or less the other classes, but probably, maybe some of them were also experienced. But yeah, probably mostly the lower end folks. Because remember, they wanted to set a standard for everybody to follow. So it never achieved its aims of having national alcohol ban like America, but they are successful in getting at least a tax placed on liquor sales. So they are successful in getting taxes placed on liquor sales at least. And lastly, you have the Sunday school movement, which is not what you think it is. It's not like, let's go to church and learn about Jesus for 2 hours or an hour, whatever the case is. So this was actually started in the 1790s. Middle-class women provided some basic education classes for working-class children. So because they went to work 6 days a week usually, on Sunday, because they went to church, they would give them some schooling for a few hours.
I feel like that would be such a fun day. Because, you don't have to work.
Right. Then you go to school, so...
Yeah, but, I'm pretty sure they were, going to sleep. They were probably like,
All right. So this provides some basic education for working class kids on Sundays. By 1850, over 2 million children were enrolled in weekly Sunday school classes. So by 1850, over 2 million children were enrolled in weekly Sunday school classes. Mostly taught by women. And in all seriousness, you might want to, when you leave here, or even now if you want, you might want to go to the cafeteria and see if they can give you some rice. I don't know if you want to do that or not. If it's that bad.
yeah, the screen's all light. It's not water.
Yeah, you might want to try to. It's something. So yeah. All right. Anyway, so everybody's good on the slide. All right. Switching gears here to a new topic we're looking at now, science and industrial thought. So what we're going to focus on today and Monday is basically the second phase of the Industrial Revolution. We've mentioned it, kind of alluded to it, but now we're going to actually go through it. So we're going to look at the second phase of the Industrial Revolution here and kind of how it develops and the impact that it has. So we're going to look now at the triumph of science and industry. Major changes in Western science and thought accompany the emergence of urban society. So major changes in Western science and thought accompany the emergence of urban society. So major changes in Western science and thought in this late 1800s period accompany the emergence of urban society. Scientific thought expanded to different areas like chemistry, physics, and electricity. So in the late 1800s, you have scientific thought expanding to new areas like chemistry, physics, and electricity. Natural and social sciences also get established too. So natural and social sciences, like natural science like geology type stuff, social sciences like psychology, sociology, those kind of things begin to get established now in the late 1800s. So Western science and thought begins to emerge more with the expansion of industrial society, urban society. You get things like chemistry, physics, electricity, more engineering, natural, social sciences as well. There's also a shift in art and literature to realism, which we're going to talk about that next week. But art and literature, we get shifted towards that as well too. All right. Anyway,
Oh, how's your kid?
he's still at home. I'm actually leaving half day today to go home take care of him. So yeah. No, I'm not leaving. I said after half day. Not this month.
Last week you just watched
No, we're not watching mine. All right. We're going to stop our first video.